Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is David Wangard again with Jason Stevens in our Achieving with Integrity project review and preview. And so we're very, very pleased with the progress we've made with our collaboration with you. And I'm just going to actually turn this over to Jason so that we can have our review. And Jason's going to be speaking to us from the Southern Hemisphere here in Auckland, New Zealand. Jason, take it away.
Greetings to the Northern Hemisphere from the Southern. It is about 7 a.m. on Tuesday morning in Auckland, and our task today is to essentially review where we've been. Theoretically, that is to talk about the four-component model and a few little changes that we've made as we've progressed through our four and now into our fifth seminar. As well as, of course, the practice side of it. Most important to you, really, is the instructional activities and the lesson templates we've been developing to take the four-component model from theory and into practice, into classroom practice more specifically. And then we want to talk a little bit about where we're going. David and I, in particular, are working on a couple of projects, most notably a planning grant that is due on September 1st, and we'll say more about that at the end, as well as lesson planning for you if you choose to continue with the project, how we might help you put these thoughts into action. And then we'll say some parting words. So let's get started on reviewing where we've been. We've looked at this slide numerous times. We've had it in all of our PowerPoints illustrating the high and low roads of ethics or morality from a four-component perspective. And the next slide is also one we've seen. It's sort of another adaptation of this four-component model, but built around core questions and the desired responses. So moral awareness is really the question about what's moral, and even more specifically, is the situation that you're looking at, the eliciting stimuli as it's labeled here, are you aware that there's moral dimensions to it? That's the central question there that we want, everybody to ask themselves, whether they're students facing an academic integrity dilemma or adults facing some other sort of dilemma. Secondly, the central question of component 2, moral judgment, is what's right? What should one do in this situation? And that one is the abstract one. It's just sort of a one in general. What would be right for any reasonable person to do in the face of this moral situation. Third and finally, or not finally, but third, and very importantly, is moving from that abstract judgment about what one should do to what I should do. What am I personally responsible for? This is, as we've noted in previous seminars, this is the real tough one. What we have in the literature a lot is the judgment-action gap. Many people, are aware when they're in a moral situation. They see, what should be done, but where the wheels sometimes fall off, for good and bad reasons, is their own commitment to doing that right thing. So that's the fourth and real important component. And then finally, how do I do it? And being aware, or in our case, really developing the skills for our students, the skill and the will, in order to conduct the action that they see as the right action. So down below, then, we've ordered really the desired responses, particularly in the face of this project's been focusing on academic integrity. We want students to recognize that this is a moral situation, that there are some ethics involved. We want them to then make the judgment that it's wrong, one should not cheat, and then, of course, probably most importantly, that they themselves are personally responsible for not cheating and come to the conclusion that I should not cheat. And then ultimately, in the end, being able to say that I did not cheat. We've taken some time to really explore, well, what's underneath these judgments or these desired responses. And we've used Jonathan Haidt's 5 intuitive ethics there to think about how cheating situations or integrity situations involve issues of are moral situations. They involve issues of fairness, first and foremost. Other issues may come at play as well, particularly loyalty issues when you're being asked to help a peer cheat. But in any event, all of these are sort of moral issues and ethics. And so if we think beyond just academic integrity, we can see where these would play out in other kinds of situations. So it's useful to talk about all 5 ethics with your students. And in terms of making the judgment, we talked about different types of reasoning that students make or may make in forming a judgment. It is certainly true that they might get caught if they cheat, and that would be one reason why one should not cheat. But we said that that's not really preferable. We prefer students to at least recognize that there's rules against it, but more preferable still would be that they recognize that it's really an issue of fairness. So that even regardless of what schools' rules have to say, that really there's a broader, more universal moral principle at play, and that's fairness here. Finally, to make that commitment, or not finally, but in order to move from the judgment, this abstract, deontic, moral judgment that one should not cheat, to the determination that I should not cheat, one would have to really activate their moral goals and values and prevent the activation of rationalizations. And having done that, then it becomes more a matter of will and skill. They've got the judgments in place, both abstract and personal, and now they're in the business of actually enacting the behavior. That typically requires some degree of skill, but also will to resist the temptations that might present themselves that would have them get off the moral high road. So we're going to say a little bit more about each of those things because of just to recognize, at least at a theoretical level, but I think also for clarifying your own understanding that that there are intervening mechanisms, and we've already discussed these in our individual seminars, except for we didn't really lay one out for moral awareness. And how do we get to moral awareness? And so again, our core question here is, what's moral? Is this a moral situation? And basically here, in our desired response of being able to see when a moral situation is at hand, how we do that, we're using simple information processing models of learning. I'm an educational psychologist by trade, so that the key mechanisms here are really simply attention and perception. We don't. A lot of this happens automatically, especially as we mature. But we start to care more about morality and think about it a lot, these things become sort of automated. But what we're asking you to do initially is to help students attend to moral situations in a dilemma. So really prompting them, and we've developed the AMAP to help you do that, and we'll review that momentarily. But the idea is to get kids to think about, is there an issue of harm or care or harm here? Is there an issue of fairness or cheating, and so on and so forth? So really directing their attention, to these dimensions of a situation. At which point, of course, it feeds back in, and they can perceive it. So attention, perception. Another way to think about it is we perceive what we attend to, right? So here you see these the arrows going in different directions. That's simply to say that this moral awareness is the I. Right, that's you. That's you looking through the lenses of your own eyes with your mind to attend to specific stimuli and or a specific situation, so that you might perceive it. So that is essentially the kind of theoretical workings of the interplay, and we used this slide from our first webinar on moral awareness. It is not the only, definition or way of framing, defining morality and helping students attend to it using these 5 ethics. There are certainly other ones. We chose this one because it happens to be a very strong theory and one that's well regarded now in the field of moral psychology and development, and and it really does cover quite a range of intuitive ethics, and quite a range of ethics, that is. And so we like the articulation of it, and so there it is. and we recommend you using it, particularly as you move to using the AMAP. The next components involve moving this awareness. So now that we see that we're actually in a moral situation, we want to get students to the moral judgment that it's wrong to cheat in the abstract in general. The key mechanisms there, we identified. Is that coming up, David? As well, actually, we didn't identify these initially, and again, this is a way of just representing them here. We just talked about reasoning, and we talked about these the different levels of reasoning. However, I wanted to be a little more consistent with where the literature is now. There's actually a great debate, if you will, among theorists in terms of where our judgments come from. There are a lot that believe it's intuition, and that is certainly true. We often have automatic judgments. They're sometimes not the best, but broadly speaking, they serve us pretty well. So that is to say, most students, they don't have to actually think about it too much, right? They know that cheating is wrong, or they know that if somebody goes up to somebody and punches them and hurts them, for no apparent cause, there's an intuitive judgment that that's wrong. So we have these sort of automatic processes. That's why that arrow was going there. We see a situation, and it automatically sort of triggers a judgment in us. However, what we're really trying to cultivate here, because of our intuitions are not always well, we need to back those up, or at least put a check on them with reasoning. And that's a more conscious, deliberative process, as I've defined it here, of weighing out, the competing, considerations. Sometimes, there is an idea of just war or justify, in the terms of self-defense. An individual may hurt another. So there's things in which you really have to pay more conscious attention to the dynamics of a situation, because your intuitions of it, may be incorrect. But we want to see both processes as mechanisms that get us to, or help us formulate moral judgments. The intuitive, of course, are really, I didn't put a definitional there, but they're unconscious. They're automatic processes. They happen without us really even being aware of them. They just appear in our consciousness as a judgment. So, and of course, we had a model that we talked about with respect to the reasoning and these three ideas that one can say one might not cheat because they might get caught, or it's against the rules, or it's not fair. Those were those we were thinking as products of reasoning, and the next slide will help us see those different levels of reasoning. And this is one that we shared in class, or rather in our second webinar. And these lenses of moral reasoning have been, they used to be 6 stages. Now we're using the 3 lenses that neo-Kohlbergian models use. But as you can see, that one about not getting caught, it's valid, but it's a low-level response. That is, it's the kind of response that that we expect from children who aren't able to really reason about things much beyond perhaps their own interest. So avoiding pleasure, maximizing pain are the typical kind of moral considerations that that a 5-year-old would invoke in making a decision. As we get older and into adolescence, we start to recognize customs, norms, rules, and laws that are really known as social conventions. These are things that cultures create, and they describe how we should behave. As we emerge into later adolescence, into adulthood, we're able to recognize even more abstract notions, things that transcend, go beyond societal conventions and norms. And so these are known as sort of universal and prescriptive. They're universal values. They're things that seem to pop up and show up as intuitive moral ethics, as Haidt talks about them, across cultures, and they're prescriptive. They're things that we should or should not do. They're not simply descriptive, things that are what you do in this culture or this society. So we hope that's clear, and of course we'll field questions if there are any. I think our panel's a little thin today, but so we'll move on to moving from judgment to commitment. And that is moving from this abstract notion, what philosophers call a deontic choice, a first-order moral judgment about what one should or should not do, and into a second-order moral judgment, which is this responsibility judgment. So you move from a thing of saying, well, one should not do it. Now, am I responsible for for not doing it? What should I do in this situation? And so that's known as a second-order responsibility judgment as opposed to a primary deontic judgment. And we did talk about the key mechanisms there and developed a VIPA for it. So one is really prioritizing moral values over other values. What I mean by that is it's easy when we're talking about an abstract actor to say that cheating is wrong. And generally, and most students can say that and do say that. However, when they talk about themselves, they soon realize that there are other sort of competing values going on there. And what might be a moral value that's competing, that is, it's loyalty to a friend because somebody's asking you to help them cheat. But also your own goals. Kids, especially nowadays more than ever, feel a great deal of pressure for grades. They have a lot of time constraints due to the fact that they're often involved in a lot of extracurricular activities. These create pressures and other values that then compete with the moral value of wanting to do the good thing. Wanting to do something that's fair, can quickly be undermined by also wanting to get that A. So that's what we mean there. You have to, at this point, they have to really value the fairness and place that over and above their own desires, their goals to get an A. That's the one we see most common, by the way, is that it's really the pressure for grades that kids face. Is usually the number one reason why they say they cheat, even when they think it's wrong. And in doing so, when kids do something that they or thinking about doing something that they realize one should not do, and something that they themselves should not do, is they activate rationalizations. And we identified several of those that we'll talk about on the next slide. But these are things that rationalizations essentially neutralize our sense of personal responsibility and then allow us to do that behavior without feeling too much guilt. I think we had some definitions in there, so we'll bring those in. So again, this idea of really prioritizing fairness and honesty, for instance, over the getting ahead or going along with the peer group. And then this resisting temptation to neutralize is personal responsibility. These are the primary mechanisms that have been theorized by Albert Bandura, but others too. These defense mechanisms or rationalizations, if you will, go back to Freud's work. But these are the ones we've identified. There's really many more of them, but these are the ones that seem most relevant to the domain of academic dishonesty and how it gets rationalized. So we've got in the italicized text the kind of examples, or at least one example that would fall under it. So displacing of responsibility is usually done to a teacher. In our work, that's where we see it most. Is that student says it's not my fault. It's the teacher was a bad instructor, and didn't teach us very well, or something to that effect. Diffusion is a little more vague. See, displacement's a specific displacement to a person, whereas diffusion could be everybody else or the situation. It's that everybody else is doing it. That's the way it goes around here. How can I be held personally responsible, when it's part of the culture, essentially. It's diffused into the culture, and it's the way business is done. Very powerful one, and one that we see certainly in a lot of the corporate scandals, and also in schools where we've surveyed where there really is a big cheating problem. This kind of mechanism would be more prominent. Euphemistic labeling, again, just as a way of sort of minimizing the harm by mislabeling it, and saying I fudged a few numbers or something to that effect. Fourth is these favorable comparisons. So you can minimize cheating behavior by pointing out that it's not like you killed somebody else or did something more egregious. easy to do with academic dishonesty because of, when you think about it, it's certainly a pervasive problem, but it's not the most, probably the most harmful one, unfortunately, that adolescents face. I mean, especially now with our attention on bullying and, let's say, drug use, teen sexual behavior. There's a range of things, moral problem spaces that that adolescents get into that have more dire consequences, for them and others than cheating. So that's an easy mechanism to invoke as well. And this one's the last one's kind of a tricky one because it really does, and it's been variously labeled as an appeal to higher loyalties or moral justification. And the reason here is because you really are actually talking about a moral value, right? When a friend asks you to help them cheat on a test, there really truly is a moral dilemma at play. Loyalty is being pitted against fairness, and as we know in adolescence, that's a really tough moral dilemma for those kids to face and to say, I'm going to basically choose this abstract principle of fairness over my relationship with my friend. So we have to recognize that as educators and highlight that, and that's why one of the dilemmas we created, if you go back to PowerPoint 3 with Laura, I believe, and getting asked by a friend, we want you to engage students in that kind of dialogue because it's real, and it's really, especially when it comes to test cheating. Having people, students getting questions or answers from a peer who took a test earlier is usually upward of 50%. That's almost more students than not are doing that every year. And similarly with the kind of spontaneous copying of tests that happens during a class, where somebody asks a friend, and sometimes non-verbally, but is prompting a student for an answer while they're taking a test. Those two involve loyalty. They pit loyalty against fairness, and they're the most common kinds of test cheating. Okay, so our final task was to get to action, and so once we've made the commitment that we should not cheat, that I should not cheat, it's my responsibility to frame noon. So we need to act, and what we highlighted in our last seminar, our last webinar, number 4, was the kind of performance character, or that's at least how we labeled skills, and moral character or will that would be necessary. It's not a given that that the students have these, and recently there's been a fair amount of research showing that even at the college level, when an instructor takes time to teach kids, say for instance, how to properly cite, how to properly paraphrase, and reference work, these kind of skills, that they are far less likely to cheat. And so we shared some activities that helped us think about how we might build some skill as a final component, so that they can do it with excellence. This is this idea of pursuit of excellence, and then pursuing that excellence in an ethical way, in a way that is characterized by respect, fairness, kindness. These are definitions actually that we pulled from the work of Davidson and Lacona and their colleagues at the Smart and Good Schools program. We also pulled this from a recent, we just had some communication with Matt Davidson and talking about what they were doing by way of helping strength, performance, and moral character. And and this is an activity that they just published last year that we thought was kind of a nice one, and one that could be used particularly after once we've asked students in the VIPA to make a decision about what they should do, not just what somebody in the abstract should do, is that they could then test that decision against these kinds of various tests that you see labeled here, the golden rule test. Is this if the situation reversed, would I want to be treated this way? The fairness test, truth test, and so on and so forth. We think some of these tests, of course, are more applicable to the academic domain than others, but it would not be a bad idea to use this activity, this checklist as it is, as a way of getting students to reflect then on, again, their moral commitment, the judgment that they've made. So we offer it up here as a possibility for that, towards that end. Okay, so if that's all the theory, and we do think it's important that that you understand that theory in order to effectively use the protocols and activities that we've developed for use with students to enhance or develop their moral functioning. So we've worked hard to create these 4-letter acronyms that make some sense. We've got the AMAP, which is the Analysis for Moral Awareness Protocol. We've got the EDMA, the Ethical Decision-Making Activity. We've got the VIPA, the Values Inventory and Prioritization Activity, and then finally the one we've developed since our webinar 4. Actually, we didn't share it as the SWAP, but we shared some of the sub-skills that go into it. We've now labeled it the SWAP, and it is the Skills and Will for Action Protocol. So let's just briefly review those 4. We've kept them to 3 steps each in order to make it as kind of compact and straightforward as possible. When you review the webinars, you'll notice that some of them have more steps involved to flesh it out as a full activity. But at the very least, we wanted to emphasize 3 steps for each of the components. So here with moral awareness, we want students to state the situation. What's the problem at hand as they see it, and then analyze it. This is the most important component in a certain respect, right? It's the one where students see or don't see that moral values or ethics are at play. And that's, of course, where you'd come in and help them do so by presenting Jonathan Haidt's 5 Intuitive Ethics and prompting them specifically to pay attention to so that they might perceive that moral values or ethics are present in the situation. As a third component, would be sort of laying out who's involved and might be affected. These are essentially, these 3 steps are coming from Narvaez and Endicott's work, and so we wanted to put all 3 of those in there. But again, I think the core question is really component 2 here, is getting them to see that, in fact, this is a moral situation. And once they've done that, then we can move to the EDMA, and you can start to talk about whether or not making a judgment, and of course the first step there would be listing the actions and the consequences, and then making a determination. So this is conscious sort of reasoning processes, right? And as they do that, they think about what are the action options, and it might be more than 2. We've provided space here for 2, but you could add more, and the consequences of them. So once those are on the table, they can then decide, well, what should one do in this situation, and then reason through it. You might recall that what we recommend doing here is having students do these steps by themselves individually, and then put them into groups. So if you go back to webinar number 2 where we talked about this activity in full form, we had a set of 3 more exercises that would go along with it, which would involve 2 important things. One is that they're in small groups discussing their decisions and their explanations, 5 and 6, with other peers. So these are called dilemma discussions, and they're able to get exposed then to other levels of reasoning. And then while they're doing this, this is where you come in with with the Neo-Kohlbergian lenses slide, and actually then so once they've kind of worked through it and they think they've they understand where each other's at, then you would ask them to think about where is their decision, and more specifically, where is their reasoning, that explanation of why X should why somebody should do a certain behavior, where having them try to think about that through the Kohlbergian lenses. This is the way of which you get them to sort of increase their thinking, hopefully move beyond the personal level and perhaps even into the societal if they're not there yet. But ideally, especially as you're working with mid or older adolescents, out of the societal and into the universal domain. Okay, so this is but if we were to reduce it down to these 3 steps, these are really the main mechanisms we want students doing when they're making a moral judgment. And of course, the big one, and the big one really is that as they transition from thinking about abstract moral judgments about what X should do in situation Y to what they would do. So we start the VIPA then with now that they've said that that X should do Y, what about them? What would you do, or what should you do in this situation? And that's the first and most important step here. And then, as we say, then we can use that checklist we just showed a moment ago as a way of getting at whether or not they've invoked some rationalization. Some students say, well, John shouldn't cheat, but in this situation, maybe it'd be all right if I did. And then of course they could then check their integrity of their decision, make sure it's free of rationalizations, and if there are some, to expose them. So here I started to label out, the different mechanisms there. And again, we would like you to teach students those mechanisms. Part of the intervention here that we're doing to help students, achieve with integrity is to make them consciously aware of what is typically unconscious, and that is the invoking of these rationalizations. We're often not aware we're doing it, and so to the extent that we can give students the tools to reflect on their decision and be aware that there are these mechanisms that can undermine our integrity, I think we'll get them that much closer to doing the right thing, not just believing in it in the abstract, but personally committing to it, and then putting it into action. So finally, once they've done that, they've decided, they've checked. We want them to consciously affirm, the goals and the values that they're prioritizing, and recognize, and we want you to be clear with this, and that it's not easy. That there are sometimes, there's a certain letting go when we face moral dilemmas. We need to prioritize one set of values over another. So the way I've labeled it, the way we label it here is this idea of, achieving with integrity. Many students are achieving. They become successful, but they're doing so in a way that is not consistent with their own value system or the judgments that they've made. And it becomes more of a success at any price or cost, as opposed to really earning, what you've the grade that you've received. I also put fairness and loyalty here because that's the big one, right? That a clear tension. But there's many more that could fall in here, and we want students using their own words to think about, the decision they've made and how what values or goals it prioritizes for them, and in which it may be causing them to sort of sacrifice or let go of. So the final three steps then, when we get to the EDMA, or the SWAP to the SWAP, yes, and this is the skills and will for action protocol. We have really two types of skills, 10 and 11 here, that we're talking about here. One is academic skills, and we talked about last week the importance of when students have big projects, whether they're research projects or writing projects, or even big exams. The idea of the importance of mini steps, as David had talked about them last time, and we had a slide for that. Breaking things down into more reasonable chunks and creating deadlines for those chunks. That's really important. It prevents the kind of last-minute cramming or sessions for studying for test, or the last night before an essay is due, and there it is, and you're stressed out, not thinking clearly, and you start to cut and paste things from the internet or from other written sources. So that's a really important academic skill, right? Helping students really self-regulate, and divide things into chunks, and space it out over time. So helping students do that. Teaching them specifically how do you paraphrase something or directly quote it, and then add the reference. So make sure you teach them how to do that. Particularly if you're working, I would say at any level of high school, because I work with university students, as does David, and it seems like they're pretty weak on those skills. So I don't think there's any age at which it's not appropriate to think very clearly about providing, at the very least, a handout that shows them the manuscript style that you're using, how one quotes and cites the work of others. And finally, there I would say, keeping helping students ask you, for questions, or others for help when they have questions and they need it. That can be difficult for some students. So I think it's incumbent upon us as educators to create an environment where we communicate that it's very clear that, that, hey, if you got questions, I want to help. I'm here to help you. And so, don't be shy about asking. The only bad question is one that's not asked. It's these kind of things that we say that really create an environment where students feel free to ask for help when they need it. I've even said to my students just to, that if they need more time, if they're thinking about cheating because of they're running out of time to, just ask me for more time. I give it to them. I'd rather have a good, honest project than a rushed and dishonest one. And I try to be very clear with that. So that way there's no excuse in essence. But secondly, and equally important, especially because so much of academic dishonesty is social in nature, where kids are asking each other or giving each other quote-unquote help. So paying attention a bit to the social skills that a student might need in order to either reframe a solicitation that's unwelcomed for some unpermitted help, and or just saying no outright, even to a friend, and perhaps even using nonverbal signals. David shared the story where a couple of our schools had created bracelets or had posters on the wall about academic integrity, where when prompted, a student could simply hold up their wrist to show this Achieving with Integrity bracelet, or point to the poster on the wall. So very important to really develop, provide students with a repertoire of type of skills. And again, you want to consult to webinar 4 where we laid out some specific activities there. Finally, and perhaps most difficult, is exercising the will. This is not something we think about, teaching as, how can we make our students, more committed to doing the right thing, but it is sort of the final piece here. We all hear about different strategies for doing that, for staying strong, and how does one, when their buttons are pressed, how do we not, behave, impulsively and perhaps irresponsibly. And so I like to think about it, and it really does matter, is taking that deep breath. I know that take a deep breath, count to 10 kind of thing. It might sound corny, but the fact is it works. And in fact, we now even have the science of it. When we take a deep breath through our mouth, and that cool air it's really hitting the vagus nerve in the back of the throat. The vagus runs up basically your spine, as it were, through your throat, and the cooling of that then releases sort of some neurochemicals that reduce, in particular, I'm forgetting the neurochemical. It reduces cortisol levels, the neurochemicals that are responsible for stress. So this idea of just take a deep breath, and it's an old saying, goes back probably hundreds of years, if not thousands, but it was only modern science that has helped us really realize how that works. It's a big cooling breath, but also thinking. So think about your future self. Again, more recent research now. When students have envision their future self and the kind of person they want to be, it really saves them, as it was, from doing bad things. And some of this research now has been looking at particularly dietary choices and lifestyle choices, basically health choices. Of course, as you know, we're facing an obesity epidemic even down here in New Zealand. We're nearly 2/3 of adults are overweight, 1/3 of children are classified as obese. What seems to be working by way of intervention now is when people think about their future self 10, 20 years from now, and they can have a sort of a dialogue with that person, if you will, they're more likely to resist temptation and do the right thing. Really fascinating stuff. finally, we would say feel confident about the moral decision that they've made. Okay, so so in sum, here's the big picture, right? We've talked about all of these four components, the mechanisms in between them, and the core questions and the desired responses that we want to flow from them. And I guess what we think about is, at the end of the day, when we get out and we, face, when we, go ahead and hit that again, David. I think we've got another, I phased in a slide here. Oh, no, maybe not. Maybe it's not there. The core questions, those are the ones. If we think about, what's the big picture here? Where do we want students to come out of, these lessons with? It really just goes up to the core questions. We want them to simply ask themselves, this is we want, responsible adults to ask themselves when they're confronted with a situation, is this a moral situation? And, what should one do? And specifically, what should I do in this situation? Am I responsible? And then hopefully, possessing the skills and the will needed to do that. So that's the core questions up there. Really are at the end of the day where we, and even just a matter of, these things actually happen quite quickly, right? When we're faced with a moral situation, usually we see it right away. We come to a very quick judgment about what one should do. As I say, the big problem is that judgment-action gap. It's we usually get steps 1 and 2 down pretty quickly. It's the third one, where either we fail to prioritize the moral goal, and/or we quickly activate rationalizations because doing the good thing is going to come at a cost to us. We might not get that A that we wanted. We might cause a little tension in a friendship because we're not going to help somebody cheat. These are things that are difficult to resist, and so the failures with academic dishonesty and with really a lot of other forms of dishonesty in this world is not that people are failing to see that it's a moral situation or failing to see what the right thing, the right and just thing is. It's the commitment thing, and then secondarily perhaps the skill and the will, of course. But we're hoping through this intervention to really foster and develop each of these components such that we're not going to make students perfect here, but we're going to strengthen these things, and in strengthening these things, we're going to make them better. Hopefully, help develop them into better people. That's the broad goal here.
And Jason, I wanted to highlight that we've had discussions, and there's been some offline discussions with some of you about how these lessons might be synthesized into just one big lesson. And if I've perpetuated that thinking, I wanted to clarify that we're looking for a mastery of these 4 different core questions, that it would almost become automatic on the kids to accomplish these steps. And you can see, as Jason's described, some of them can go rather quickly. But to accomplish that, we have provided these 4 different webinars with 4 different lessons and 4 different activities. What's the point? We're trying to give the kids the skill sets at each level and the practice at each level to gain some mastery, competency when you put it all together. So when the kid's out in the hall and someone asks them to cheat, obviously they're not going to be going through all of the steps that we've identified in the previous webinars, but we trust and hope that they'll have the mastery to be able to process this quickly as described right here. And so I want to step back and at least in some of the comments I might have made to some of you offline to think that you could summarize all of this in one lesson. That would be frustrating the idea of the practice at each component. And so I just wanted to make that clarification. But yes, we're at the end of the webinars and we're seeing these 4 processes that we could hope that could be accomplished with great alacrity by kids who have got the mastery for it. So this is our summary of the steps.
Yeah, and that's a good and important clarification, David. I mean, you certainly could. You could take all this slide right here and somehow do it all in one lesson, and it could work, and it probably actually would have some degree of effect in an immediate sense. We've seen research that has done other things like that, where you just sort of present something in rather short order. And if you have an immediate post-test, that is, there's an immediate opportunity, it's on the mind of the kids, you can get some traction and get some effect. However, if you really want to produce longer-term change, one 20, 30-minute lesson, on these 4 components, probably not going to be sufficient. The idea is to create at least 1, if not even 2 lessons, for each component. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't at the outset say, hey, here's the big picture, with your students. Here's where we're going. That'd be totally fine to sort of lay out the model, and then say, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to, or the next week, we're going to talk more about moral awareness and what that means, and then moral judgment and how people make them. But in order to get the kind of mastery that David references in an enduring effect, it's simply not possible to do it in 1 lesson and have it stick. There's a lot here, as you've just seen, I think. Now again, so nobody's obligated at this point to do anything, but these are resources we've provided, and we hope that you'll take up the challenge of using at some point. We've got, as listed on this website, or this page right here, this slide, we've got all these webinars online, the individual ones. The 5th one will be posted, and we'll add that link. We've got all the lesson templates online as well. Each one for each of the 4 components. We've got some lesson plans that you yourselves have created on the project blog, and that will continue to grow, we hope. And then finally, more broadly, David's organization, the School for Ethical Education, has a wonderful website with a whole bunch of other additional resources coming from some of our previous work together and other work that he's been working on related to cultivating integrity. So a plethora of resources there. Let's talk a bit about next steps. David and I are working on a character education article right now for the Peabody Journal of Education. That's important here because if it's really going to lay out, in a paper form, exactly what we've been working on with you. We are incredibly grateful. I'll say it now, and we'll say it at the end here, for the, your time and having joined us over these webinars, and your interest in the project that's helped us sort of think, about what we're doing and how we want to do it. And that's culminating in what's due on September 1st, a planning grant, a 1-year planning grant that will give us the funds and the time to really implement, further develop these lessons, further train you if you choose to stay with the project, and then even compensate you for doing so. So this grant money would be important to us to really test this out and to look at how this works, not your teaching of it as well as its potential impact on students. So your mission then, if you choose to accept it, would be to continue with what you've been doing, and we'd like to see first drafts of all the lesson plans. And maybe you're not using all of them. We're okay at this point if you do want to modify. If we get the grant, which would have an effective date of January 1st next year, then we would oblige you to using the components, and we put some more constraints on you and responsibilities. But at this point, you're working on a volunteer basis, and we're happy to engage with you and work with you with what you'd like to do. So if you get us that by July 15th, we'll return with comment by August 1st, so that you can finalize things by August 15th, and then proceed to to teaching it. We do want all of the lessons to be taught over a 2 to 4 week period, not necessarily back to back. That we want them in so much as possible to be integrated in with your content, so that it's somewhat seamless and that it works, and so it's not like you're just adding something on extra. So in so much as possible, if you can do that, all the teaching will be done by October 1st would be the idea. Did I miss anything else there, David? I think that was.
No, that's great. And so some of you have already posted lessons, and what we're saying is that by July 15th, we'll have we'll get these reviews back to you by August 1.
Yeah. The next slide does lay out a little bit more about the grant, just for those that are curious in what's going on. This is what's known as a logic model, very common thing when you're applying for for external funding, to show kind of what are the inputs, outputs, and outcomes kind of thing, as you can see on top. So the inputs being funding from JTF, funding from the University of Auckland that's supporting my work, funding from Right Investor Services that supports so much of what David and the School for Ethical Education does, professional staff, outside experts that we consult and work with, books, articles, resources, all this stuff is stuff that are just inputs. Activities, we've been using webinars for this sort of pilot approach, but the full model will include on-site team meetings. So for each of you, some of you, usually there's at least one or two, three, even 4 or 5 of you at a given school, but we're committed to coming out and doing meetings, doing professional development, workshops, classroom observations, and mentoring to help you, take these ideas and put them into action in your classroom. You'll note here that the participants are really just a dozen USA teachers and a dozen from New Zealand. There are stipends involved. That's not to lure you in, but that's generally to compensate you for, taking on what is, as you've already seen, a time-consuming process. Those will be at least 1,000 a year, with some extra monies for time buyout if we need to do some professional development with you during class time, during the day. That's the model that's used actually more in New Zealand, but may be applicable to the USA as well. So this is a small project. This is not a big project. This is a 1-year planning grant, really, to get these components in place, so that then we can, and this is what the John Templeton Foundation in particular recommended for us, because really what we're aiming at is getting a 3-year larger scale intervention underway. But before we do that, we do have to make sure that we're able to increase, as you see here under the outcomes, increase content knowledge of our participants, that is you, as well as your pedagogical knowledge, your ability to really take these ideas and use them in your classroom, in the form of creating an intermediate goal of creating the curricula, and then us making sure that you're, developing. We have to. David and I are working primarily now, as we, this grant will help us focus on assessment activities to make sure that we have fidelity of implementation, as it's known. It should be fidelity of implementation, not implementation of fidelity. Sorry about that. I got to change that. And then ultimately, yeah, that in a sense that at least for this planning grant, it's really changing your behavior so that you're using these AI curricula, and that we're able to assess student changes. We're not actually promising student changes at this point. We're promising the validity of assessments related to coding and scoring those components of moral functioning. A fine point. But in any event, we'd like to open it up in our last 5-6 minutes here to any questions or comments that you may have concerning where we've been or where we're going.
And we're going to need to just take those online and have folks respond to us that way. But we're asking, as Jason's outlined here, your comments on everything you've participated in, the 4-component model in general, each individual component, any of the activities we've suggested, and what you've seen designed. And how have these lesson templates worked for you? So we greatly welcome your feedback and dialogue about it, and we recognize that the webinar timing has been a problem for some of you, particularly as we're at the end of the school year. But as you review these recordings and want to get back to us, we welcome that through email or phone calls. And we've placed, as we noted on the blog, all these different resources, and as Jason has noted, we want to just say one big thank you for participating with us this semester.
Yeah, indeed. We truly have enjoyed the opportunity, appreciate the time and efforts you've made to join us, and we'll hope to work with you more in the future. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone, and we will be in touch with follow-up, and I'm going to stop the recording now, but we're looking forward to staying in touch with all of those that want to be engaged.